Hey guys, Jason here from Indescendants. Tonight we're at the Regency in Glendale and we're gonna party it up with 5 South. So tonight we're gonna expect around 100 people, and it's your typical ballroom, dance floors in the middle, and you have speakers on both sides. But we did something a little bit different here, but it still sounds good. We've got the whole dance floor right here. It's not super shiny or reflective, so it's not like your super ornate, super echoey marble, but a dance floor nonetheless. So typical of banquet halls and ballrooms, there's gonna be carpeted floor. So what that does to the sound, like a ballroom that you'd encounter like at a hotel or something like that, it absorbs the highs and mids, so it's kind of inherently kind of boomy, kind of muddy. And so what I did on the EQ was, on the graphic EQ, I kind of notched some low mids around like 200, 300, 400. There was some boxiness there that I got rid of, kind of dipped in a little bit, and I didn't do any boosting because for me personally, I like EQing subtractively. So if I don't need it, just remove it, and if I need more, I could always add it. So for me, EQ is all about subtraction first. Now, typical of other ballrooms and banquet halls and any like hall, it's drywall. So let's check it out over here. Plaster drywall doesn't do too much for reverberation. It doesn't make it super echoey like your church or cathedral or like some ornate, like super fancy venues. So it's just kind of like a baseline kind of boxy mid sound. When you have your speakers next to a wall, it accentuates the bass. So if you notice that your bass is booming, it's because you're next to a wall. In this case, since we have a subwoofer, let's check out the subwoofer. And here's our sub taking care of the lows. Now, most powered speakers, especially these days, have built-in DSP, digital signal processing, some EQ that you can, you turn down your lows. You can even do like some fancy EQs. Some speakers have more than your 3-band EQ, maybe like 5, 10. They're getting really fancy nowadays, which is great because we don't want to carry and lug around all this rack equipment, EQs. Speakers nowadays have everything that you need. So for speakers, we have our what you call point source speakers, or your typical box powered speaker with a woofer and a horn. And today we also have a subwoofer, which I just mentioned, taking care of that sub, the nice low meaty bass frequencies. Now, what you see increasingly getting more popular is these speaker columns and line arrays, especially for those big venues. Now, the difference is, to put simply, is that the point source speakers have a sort of a finite window of dispersion. That's what the horn takes care of, and you don't really see it because it's behind the grill, but horn is kind of like a compression driver, a speaker that takes care of the high frequencies, and there's a mouth on it. So it's kind of like akin to you cupping your hands over your mouth so that the sound will spread. Now what that does, it inherently gives it a more mid-range kind of honky sound, which is great because it pushes that sound all the way through the back. It pushes it all through air efficiently. But it has a finite window. And now you can see on the speaker specs, if you look them up for your particular speaker that you have, the particular brand that you have, you'll see dispersion characteristics. It's usually denoted in a coverage pattern. You'll see something like coverage pattern, and it'll give you a number of degrees. Now, the cool part about line arrays is that they have a really wide dispersion. And how they're set up is, now we don't have them right now, but how they're set up is, think of it as a big column or a curved array of speakers, array meaning multiple, and there are multiple little speakers, typically ranging from around like 4 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches for the bigger guys. But we've got the traditional thing, and it works just fine, especially for a small, medium-sized venue like this. So, pros and cons. Typical speaker, tried and true. It pushes that mid-range pretty far. Cons is that they kind of sound kind of honky. Now, line arrays also sound more smoother because they don't have that horn, but the con is that it doesn't have that sort of mid-range push. actually did some reading on some forums, and a lot of the old school guys prefer the punch and the clarity and the mid-range of these old school point source style speakers over the line arrays. But line arrays sound great because once you splay them all together in that line, really pushes that sound really far. More on that later on another video. But these speakers are great. They're gonna sound really good today and we're gonna rock them. So here we are at the booth, our little tech area where I have the mixer, the digital mixer, and the laptop to control the mixer. Now today I don't have the iPad. Lots of mixers these days, you can walk around with the iPad and you know, get in that area where the crowd is so you can really hear how it's going. For me, I opted to leave the iPad at home and I just kind of walked around and got a general sense of how it sounded when our DJ was playing music. So let's take a look at the EQ over here. So I mentioned that carpet kind of has that. It absorbs some of the highs and smaller venues get kind of boomy. So here's how I compensated for it. Real simple, I'm not gonna get too technical. Around the 100, 200 low mid area, I took out a lot of that 250. That's what I heard, at least in my ears. That was that kind of carpety, small room boominess that I got rid of. And I also did a little bit of the lower mids too. So if you guys can see it right there, I dipped a little 160, 200, a lot of 250, a little 320, and some boxiness 400 and 500. Now, to my ears, obviously I told you guys that this is a point source speaker with a horn. I noticed kind of some mid-range honkiness, especially when we got on the mic, when we were talking on the mic. I just took a little bit of that 600, 800, some upper lower mids. It wasn't too honky. These QSCs are pretty smooth and we like them a lot. So that's what I heard from the horn. So I kind of just made it a little smoother. I didn't do anything to the high range just yet because we don't have any people. Here's another important note. As people gather into the room, people are dancing, people are seated at the tables, they absorb frequencies. Our bodies are kind of like organic sound absorption material. So keep that in mind when you guys are DJing or running live sound. My take on it is think subtractive first. Think subtractive with the EQ. If you don't need it, remove it. And as people start filling in, you feel like you could kind of push that clarity and have a little more treble, it's there. But don't go flat out pushing it, boosting, when you don't even know the situation just yet. So kind of wait on that and use your ears. So that's how I EQ'd it. That's how I tuned it to this room and this situation with our equipment. And we're waiting for more people to filter in, but as they come in, we'll be able to push it more, EQ it a little bit differently, but we're ready to rock. So see you after the show. Man, so that was a great party, great success, sounded great. Of course, with all things audio, nothing's ever going to be static. You're always going to have to make adjustments as you go. As I mentioned earlier, pre-party, pre-show, as people trickle in, you get that absorption. Bodies on the dance floor, people at their seats absorb the sound. So, of course, we could, we leave headroom on the mixer, we leave headroom so we can push the volume and not clip and not distort. So we were able to do that. Also, we were able to tastefully push the sub levels, bass levels up tastefully, nothing too obnoxious, maybe 2 or 3 dB, so we could kind of accommodate sort of a nice knock on the bass so people feel like dancing. So that was a good side. I noticed during the, as our DJ pushes the levels a little hotter, the harshness of the speakers tend to get accentuated, so I further EQ'd some of the high mids and upper high mids, and even up to like 5K, 6K. I just took a little bit of that harshness out, so that when we further pushed it, it sounded not so piercing in our ears. So it was a good thing. It sounded great. Everyone had a good time. People were dancing. So that's a good side. The bad side, we were pushing some levels, and in this local area, around the time I want to say around 11 o'clock or so. Police did come, they told us to turn it down. There's a local sound ordinance where at a certain time, I think it was around 11, where we couldn't play that loud. We hit the decibel limit, whatever that was. So instead of just turning down the master fader and calling it a day, I went ahead and lowered the bass. I EQ'd a little bit of the bass out on the graphic EQ, and I lowered the sub a little bit. And the thing about bass is, it's such a long wavelength. It carries, it can go through walls. That's the reason why when cars pass by that have subwoofers, you can really hear it. Even though you don't really hear the mids or treble, you don't hear the upper end. So bass travels, and that's what got us in trouble. So we turned that down, and we checked in with them, and they said it was okay. So the party continued at a reduced level, but it was more about the bass, so we reduced it. So overall, it was a great party. Everything sounded great. We made adjustments as we went on throughout the show. It's important to always adjust sound. Again, when people come in, you gotta adjust. Temperature, that could come into play. We'll talk about that more maybe in another video, but overall it was great. We made adjustments and we made it happen, and everyone had a good time. So till next time, guys, stay tuned.